Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Eric, and today we are going to be building the long-awaited Y6 AP platform. We're going to cover in our build the building of the ElectroHub and the frame. We're even going to go over the new camera rail system with the sliding camera and battery trays, as well as the new landing gear that has been added to the design to give you clearance for a gimbal. So let's get started. So this is what you can expect to see in your Y6 kit. You're going to get props, and you'll actually have some extra. It comes with 6 regular and 6 reverse, so you'll be able to use 3 of each for your first flight and then have 3 of each for spares. This is Power Pack D for the Hex, so make sure when you order your Power Pack off the store you get the one for the Hex. I think there's one for the Quad and there's one for the Dragonfly. So you're going to want Power Pack D for the Hex, and then you're going to get the pigtail, you're going to get the speed controls, booms to make not only the arms but also the landing gear. The motor mounts, these motor mounts are designed to be able to top and bottom mount motors and then bolt them to the arms. So you'll get enough for your motors there. You're going to obviously get your ElectroHub plates. These are the braces for the landing gear, and these are the top braces, and then these are the bottom braces for where the feet attach on, and we're going to get into more in depth on that later on in the build. We supply the wrenches and then the bolt packs for the arms, and then this is the rail system for the battery and the camera mount that allows you to slide the camera mount and slide the battery for center of gravity adjustment on your copter. So all the hardware for that comes as well. Get a Flight Test LiPo bag, and I think we can get started on the build. First thing that I'm going to do is strike center lines on my boom so that I can drill the holes to attach it to the ElectroHub plate, and as well do the holes for the motor mounts. So these are 1/2 inch booms, so I'm just going to put my calipers at about 1/4 inch and just strike my lines down each end, and then we'll have a center point to work off of, and then you can take your pencil and just highlight down that scribe line, and then it makes it a little bit more visible. You're going to want to repeat this same process. We're going to do one boom here for you, and then you'll repeat this process for all 3. So the first thing then after scribing center lines is to find in how far we're going to need for the holes to the ElectroHub plate. I measure in 5/16 of an inch, so we'll set the calipers to 5/16. And then we're going to strike a line across the end just like this. And a good rule of thumb is to go ahead and do this on all 3. Since your calipers are set, you can go ahead and strike your lines to all 3 booms while you have that measurement. I normally work on a drill press, but we're just going to use a hand drill since some people don't have access to a drill press. We'll just show how to do it with a hand drill. But to get a really precision drill, obviously squared on a drill press table is going to be the best way to do it. Another thing that I recommend is to have a block of wood underneath that you can drill through, so that when the drill bit punches through the other side, you don't splinter out. If you just do this in the air, a lot of times you're going to get a splinter where the drill bit comes through the other side. We're going to empty out our first bolt pack, and we're going to take one of the bolts. We're just going to pop that through the inner arm, and you want to make sure you're on the correct spot for the Y6. You're going to have your tail boom. This is going to be the same setup basically as a tricopter at first. And then we're going to push this through. And now we can lay this down on the table. And we're just going to rotate this hole until you see the scribe line that you made right in the center of the hole. And then you can take a pencil and just make a nice mark around there. And then you can leave the ElectroHub plate on there if you press hard enough when you drill, and that'll kind of help keep you lined up. Now when you put your bolt through, you've lined it up perfectly and everything matches. So you're going to want to repeat that process for each of the other 2 booms. So I'll go ahead and do that now. We've got all 3 booms drilled out to attach to the ElectroHub plate. So the next thing we're going to do is get out the motor mounts, and we're going to drill the holes, I should say, for the mounts. So the best way to do this, I've found, is to take this is squared on the end, and so you can just line this up right on the end of the boom. And I'll caution you, I've done this after not sleeping for a long time. I've actually had the boom sideways, and I drilled the holes through and then realized that I couldn't mount the motors that way. So make sure that you are on the right side. It's a pretty easy mistake to make. And you just want to line this up, and you can just feel on the end when you're flush. And then just squeeze this to make sure you're flush with the sides. And then you're just going to make a little mark inside of there to drill your first hole. So we're going to drill the holes for the motor mount here, and the other thing you're going to remember is this is a 3mm drill bit, so you'll want to have that size to drill these out for the 3mm bolts. So then once again, just like we did with the ElectroHub plate, you can use this as a pattern. We're going to put this on. We're just going to drop a bolt down here just temporarily to kind of hold it in place. And then you can do the same thing. You can just kind of move this across till you see that dead center of the hole. Pinch that on the side there, and then you can just drill right down through here. And try to keep your drill as straight as you can, because where the hole exits on the bottom, as long as that is straight, it'll line up when you put the bottom one on. If not, you might have to wobble that out just a little bit. So we can see how good we did. Punch these bolts through and then see if we can put the plate on there. And I am a tiny bit off, so we'll just wobble that out a little bit. And we're really close, and look at that. We got our bolts to come through on both sides. So you're going to want to go ahead and repeat that process as well for each of the 3 booms. Now that we have our motor holes and our plate holes drilled, we're going to take the ElectroHub plates and attach the arms to it. There's a couple ways you can do this. This is the top plate, and this is the one that does not have any solder points on it. I always mount this one on top. You can do this bottom plate 2 ways. You can turn this in if you want these solder joints to be on the inside to keep this a little cleaner on the bottom, or you can put that towards the bottom. I always do mine towards the bottom just so that if I ever have to make a repair or replace a speed control, it's a little bit easier to get to this without disassembling the entire center section. So we'll take our bolt packs, and if you do happen to get the bolts mixed up, the longer ones are to go through the motor, and the shorter ones are the ones to go through the center section and the arms. We're going to push that down. We'll use the included 2mm. Just kind of make sure those are all the way in. And we're going to just take our bottom plate, and you're going to want to make sure again that you're picking the correct holes for the Y6 or tricopter configuration for the frame. Put a nylocking nut on the bottom. And we have a nut driver that's also included. We can use to just tighten those up. Now when I'm building, I just usually snug these up at first, so if I have to make any adjustments later, I can. So we'll go ahead and just tighten these up a little. And we can move on to putting the rest of the arms on the exact same way. So you'll want to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so we have all 3 arms on the copter, and again, you're going to want to remember that this frame, until we put motors on, is the same setup as a tricopter. So if you look at the Flite Test logo, the center is the tail boom, and then these are going to be, there's 3 sets of holes here. The middle one is the one you're going to want for a quad, so you want to be on the furthest one back of those front 2 sections. All right, so I'm going to take a little sidetrack here in the build and show how to put together the angled arm set, just in case you want to go with that option instead of just the regular flat arms. So the angled arm copter is going to have a little bit longer arms on it, which gives you better prop clearance on the back of the battery, but also increases the stability of the copter by adding some dihedral to the frame. So naturally you're going to build 3 of these, but we're just going to build 1 just to show you how that works. So you're going to have a regular 10-inch boom, and we're going to add a 3.5-inch piece onto this, and this is the part where you're going to bolt the arm into the ElectroHub. So we're going to take our scribe and do the same thing as we did earlier. We're going to scribe a line down the middle, and we're going to use this. We'll highlight this with a pencil so we can see it. We'll scribe in 5/16 to the end. We'll highlight that and we'll drill our first hole, and then we can use the ElectroHub plate to line up the next hole, and then we'll move on and drill the holes and mount the actual angled arm brackets. Now we're going to use the ElectroHub plate just like we did in the flat arm, and we're going to just put a bolt through here. And just as, again, as in the flat arm, we're just going to turn this until we see the scribe line centered in there, and we'll go ahead and drill our hole. Now that we've got the holes drilled for the inner part of the arm, we're going to go ahead and flip this over onto its side, and we're going to find the center of our angled arm bracket, which you can see right there. There's a little divot there where the manufacturing process for the G10 kind of leaves a little nice divot there that easy to see for center. Alright, so we'll lay this bracket over here, and right where that divot is, we'll just try to line that right up to the end, center that up, and then you just kind of squeeze this and center it up there. And then we're just going to mark our holes here. Now again, I'll just drill 1, and then we'll put the bracket on there to line it up so that we know that they're lined up perfectly. You really want to pay attention when you're doing this that you're drilling at the right ends, otherwise you'll have to make a new piece. So now we'll put this through the first angled arm bracket, and sometimes if you don't like the way that those are tight, you can ream these out. It's nice if you want it to thread on, but if you don't, you can just ream that out with a 3mm drill bit. We'll push that right down. So now we can line up the rest of this here, making sure that we're on center on the end. Go ahead and just drill right through here. Now we've got the inner part to our angled arm bracket finished, which that will bolt to the ElectroHub on the inside. And then the bracket will be here. The other part of the 10-inch boom, which we'll drill separately, is going to go on just like that and bolt together. So we'll do that part next. We're going to put the nuts on here, but we're not going to tighten them all the way down yet. We're just going to use this to just make sure they don't fall apart here while we're working with the rest of it. Just hand turn those on for the time being. So you can see our angle brackets are on there. Everything's nice and flush. And now we're going to, if you notice, if you put this 10-inch boom in here, you're going to go down and there's going to be a gap right there. So we're going to find that angle and then just sand that off on a belt sander or use a miter box with an X-Acto saw and just match that angle up as closely as possible. Okay, so to find this angle that we're going to cut this off at so that it'll match up in here pretty well, we're going to put this in here just like this. And you're going to see that if you touch these together on the top side, that there will be a gap on the bottom side. So we want to just kind of eliminate that gap. So if you lay this flat, and then we're going to slide this in, this being the bottom of the angled arm. We're going to slide this in till the bottom of the 10-inch boom lines up with the bottom side of the angle. And if we pinch that, you'll turn this over, you're going to see there's an overhang there. So right where that little divot is in the G10, we're just going to make a little mark right there. So with that mark, we're going to know that that's the amount of material we're going to take off to the point down here. So we'll pull this off, and we're going to take our straight edge, and we're just going to line up on that point and on the mark that we made, and we're just going to scribe a line right across there. So all of this material is going to be removed on the sander or with a miter saw. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So we took that little bit of material off the end. We got a little bevel there, and now we're going to put this into the angled arm. You'll notice that when we line up the angle bracket with the bottom flush, the gap between there is nice and snug. We'll turn that over, and we've got a nice and snug fit. So now the next thing we're going to do is just go ahead and drill our holes. So we'll just kind of press this down, make sure it's flush on both sides, and you can kind of feel that as you run your fingers along there. And you just visually look to make sure your gaps are closed, and we'll drill the first hole. So we'll put the bolt through here and we'll secure that fit. And then the next thing we're going to do now is just make sure that this is flush with the top and bottom. So we'll just kind of pinch that in the middle right there, make sure that it fits nice and snug. And then we'll drill this hole through. And then we can put our last bolt right through here. Pop that right out the back, and because we drilled through, everything lines up beautifully. Now, as long as this is flush and this is flush, that means you've matched your angles correctly, and you can go ahead and tighten these down and then install this into the copter, or drill your motor holes first if you prefer. And that's the assembly of an angled arm. So another thing that you're going to want to watch for when you build an angled arm is that you build them in matched sets. And what I mean by that is when you move on to build arm number 2 and arm number 3, if you really want your copter to track well and hover well hands off, you're going to want to put this edge flat and the other 2 arms that you build after this one, and just hold them all flat beside each other. And you want to make sure that the arms, that there's not one way higher than another, etc. So if you have another boom, one of the other booms should not be lower or higher than the other. They should all be the same height. So you can do one of a few things. You can put this other one beside here, and when you tighten it down, you can clamp it with a clamp on the end and then tighten the bolts down. You could use some type of a dihedral block where you measure this up and then you lay this on, tighten down the next arm, tighten down the next arm, and then check them to make sure that all 3 are the same. So you just want to watch for that. If this one's a few degrees higher than the other one, then that's going to change the thrust vectoring angle of that motor in particular, and it could cause your copter to drift a little bit while it's in a hover. So make sure that you try to build the angled arms as precisely as possible, and I think you'll be really happy with the results. So the next thing we're going to do is to install the motors to the motor mount brackets, and you want to put all 6 of your motors on the motor mount brackets with the included screws through the center holes, which attaches the motor to the mount, and then later we're going to attach both through with the same bolt onto the arm, and it will sandwich the arm in between. So we're going to go ahead and grab a motor, and if you get Power Pack D, you're going to notice that some of the motors have a black acorn nut and some of them are red, and that's to signify the difference of counterclockwise and clockwise threads. So you'll also want to keep that in mind when you go to do the build. And the setup of whether you have a counterclockwise or a clockwise on the top or bottom is going to depend on the board. The NACE 32 has a little bit different configuration for motors than does the Vector and the DJI NASA board. So you're gonna want to look at the motor configuration for the board that you choose before you actually mount these to the helicopter. So in the motor pack, you're going to get the screws for attaching the bolts, I should say, to attach the motors to the mounts. So we're going to take one of these, and then you're just going to put those here. I recommend putting some blue Loctite on these screws so that just from vibration that they don't work their way out in flight. In your motor pack for the Emax motors, you're going to find 2 sets of screws, and I want to just talk quickly about which ones you're going to use. On the Y6 motor mount that we have made of G10, you're going to want to use the one with the socket head on the top. There are some other screws that are Phillips head and they're beveled, and that's for this style of motor, so that when this bolt goes in, it's flush, because that's going to normally mount against the piece of wood and it needs to be flush. But that's not a supplied motor mount. I just wanted to show you guys that that's what those screws are for. You can just put these little ones aside and just save them for something else if you have another project. We're going to concentrate on the socket heads. You'll want to pay attention when putting the motor mounts on to use the wider set of holes on the bottom of the motor. So you'll see here that if we look at these two holes on center, if we go to the other two, those are quite a bit closer together. So you're going to want to make sure that you use the wider holes. The reason for that is you want these bolts that you use to be wide enough that when you put the motor onto the arm, those bolts will actually straddle each side of the arm. If you use the closer bolts, it won't fit onto the arm properly. All right, so we're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on the edge of here, and you don't need a lot, just a little dab. Just to secure the threads here. So we put a little on here. So this is going to be the 2.5. And another thing that you'll want to do is don't tighten this one all the way down at first, because you're going to want to be able to move this to get the other bolt in. A mistake I think everybody has made at least once. And I always try to hand turn these in to make sure not to cross thread. So get into a good practice, or it's a good practice to get into, I should say, to turn those in as far as you can by hand. And then you can just snug them up with a wrench, and that avoids a cross thread. All right, so now that we have the motor mounts all attached to the motors, we're gonna go ahead and mount the motors to the arms. All right, so we're gonna use the longer of the two bolts. You'll notice here that we have a long one and a short one. The short one's used for attaching the arms to the hub. The longer is used to go through these motor mounts because the G10 is a little bit thicker. All right, so we'll put our bolt in here and we'll just push right into the end of the arm. Take another bolt then and push this one through, and you can push them down till they flush against your work surface. Then when you flip this upside down, you can just give them just a little punch through and it'll help to line up the other motor when we put this on. So now that those are through, you'll want to put the locking nut on the end of each one, and then we'll snug these down. Use the included nut driver, and again, just snug this up on each side, and then we'll do the final tighten then once they're both snug. And you also want to pay attention that these are flush to the ends. All right, now we're going to snug these down pretty tight, and we'll move on to repeat this same process for each of the 6 motors. We got all the motors attached to the frame. So the next step in the build is to take the ESCs, and we're going to go ahead and plug these bullet connectors in. Now keep in mind you will have to maybe change these depending on your flight controller to change the proper direction of the motor, but we're just going to plug these in for now so that we can measure length and get these set up to solder the negative and positives to the bottom of the ElectroHub. You can mount these on the sides, you can mount these up top. It's kind of personal preference where you want to mount these, or if you really want to do a clean build, you can find a way to mount your ESCs on the insides of the ElectroHub, but you probably will have to put some extension wires on your power and negative, and possibly even on here. So there's a couple different options you can do for mounting the speed controls. We're just going to go with the standard where we just pop these on the booms, and we'll zip tie these later in the build, but we're not going to do that right this second because we need to space this accordingly for when we solder the wires to the bottom. If we have this out too far and it's zip tied, then obviously these won't reach, so we'll zip tie those down later on. All right, so we've got all of our speed controls plugged in, and I'm going to go ahead and plug in the last one here. And then the next step is going to be to solder the speed control power leads to the bottom of the ElectroHub. So you can use a rubber band that you can just kind of stretch around here and just hold these kind of somewhat in place so that you can still move them, and then we'll zip tie that later on. Or you can just let them hang, whichever you prefer. All right, I'm just going to finish up the soldering here of the ESCs. We just have them Velcroed onto the sides here. So I got all the power cables to the plus and minus respectively. I'm just finishing up this last one. Just put a little solder on each of the pads here. And then I also like to put solder on the end of my wires just so that it's tinned up and ready to go. Alright, so we got our wires tinned and those last couple pads with some solder on. You can use a piece of wood or even the front of a pair of scissors to hold that so you don't burn yourself while you tighten this up. Or solder that down, that way it has a nice solder joint. Alright, so all of our ESCs have power and are soldered up now. Another thing to keep in mind is you'll want to solder your power wires to the bigger pads. There are plus and minus pads out here, but those are just for smaller wires to run LED lights off of. So you don't want to power your motors or speed controls off of that. You'll want to make sure to use the bigger pads. Now that we got the last ESC soldered up, we're ready to put a pigtail on. And around the Flite test office, we use the XT60 connector as our choice. So I got these tinned already, and I'm just going to go ahead and put some solder onto an available empty pad here. Prep that, get a minus, and then we'll do a plus. And once again, you can use a pair of scissors or even a needle nose pliers to just kind of hold this down on there so you don't burn your fingers. Get a good solder joint and let that cool. Alright, so now we'll solder the positive side on. I always run my soldering iron a little hot. I don't know if that's exactly the best thing to do, but that's what's always really worked well for me because it heats up the pad, it heats up the solder and the wire quickly. If you heat it slow, it has time for that heat to travel up the wire and melt things. One of the benefits of the ElectroHub as well is having these power distribution built right into the block. That's what's made this such a popular copter to put together. We've got our speed controls all soldered up. And the next thing to do is we're going to zip tie the wiring and kind of clean this up a little bit and get the speed controls attached to the arms. So we just held them in place right now with Velcro while we were doing our soldering, so we're going to go ahead and take that off. I'm just going to use some zip ties to just fasten these to the outsides of the arms right around here. Now we're not going to put all the zip ties on yet because we do have to check the spinning direction of the motors, so we don't want to tie these down to where we can't get the bullet connectors off if we do need to switch one for motor direction. So for now we're just going to go ahead and put the first zip tie on right here closest to the ESC. Our servo wires I usually bring up through the center of the hub. You can run them beside if you like. So I'm going to feed each of the servo wires up through the center. And then we can cinch the front side of that down with a zip tie as well. So we've got all of our ESCs zip tied on here. We have our wires ran up through, and I always have been in the habit of looking at the motor configuration of the board that I'm going to use at this point so that when I run these up here I have them labeled accordingly, and I just used a gold colored Sharpie marker so it would stand out on the black. So I labeled each of my ESCs according to the motor layout, and this is for the NAES 32 board that I'm going to be putting on this particular machine, but this will be different for every board that you use because the motor configurations are a little different for each setup. So you'll want to, if you want, that's an easy way to tell which is which down the road instead of trying to trace these wires back through. So we've zip tied everything. I did leave the zip ties off of this end though so that the bullet connectors can be switched out if the motor rotations are wrong, but then before we put propellers on we will tighten this down and put a zip tie around here to keep those from coming up into the prop and getting cut. Let's go ahead and cut these first. Another little trick that I learned is to take a hobby knife after you've used a pair of scissors or wire cutters. These can be really sharp on the ends. So you can see that little area right there. You could easily rip your skin open on that. I've always gotten in the habit of taking a hobby knife and trimming off that extra, and so now if you rake your finger across there you're not slicing yourself open. So that's a little extra step that can save you some headache later. Now that we have the whole center section and the arms, motors, and speed controls on, we're going to go ahead with the landing gear and the camera rail, battery plate, and all that. We're going to do this in two steps, so we're going to start by building the wooden portion of the landing gear, and then we'll come back and attach the rail system on the top of it at the end. This is a finished one, and I prefer to paint all my stuff and make it match. You can leave it unpainted, you can stain it, paint it, whatever you like. So this is just kind of an example of what this is going to look like when we're all done. So let's get started. We've got our landing gear center top braces, and then we also have the T to attach the feet on the bottom, which that's what that'll look like when that's finished up. So we have our wooden booms, and we're going to go ahead and make some measurements and mark some lines to get started with this build. So this is probably the hardest part of the whole build, is this center section piece that's going to go across here, just because you've got to match the angle to the leg coming up in. So that's probably the trickiest part of the whole build. So we'll walk through how to get started with that. Just take this landing gear, put it over top of the small piece of wood here, and then we're going to match this angle right here, and that'll give us a starting point for making our first piece. So we can kind of mark that line right there, and that just matches the angle of this leg coming up into this piece being flat here. So however you can cut this off, either with an X-Acto razor saw, a scroll saw, band saw, or even if you have a belt sander, that's not enough meat there that you can't just kind of belt sand that off, which is what I'm going to do and match that angle right there. Okay, so now that we sanded our first angle, another easy thing that I found is to just lay this on a piece of paper like this. We're just going to hold this down right here, and we're just going to trace around the top side of it. And you'll notice I'm not connecting the lines right here at the points. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this away, and I'm just going to get a ruler straight edge and draw the lines past where they're going to meet. And this is just to ensure that we're going to match these angles up as close as possible. So now when we lay this center bracket in here, we'll line them up with the lines. And then you can even trace the underside here. Now we can make a little mark off of the corner where those two pieces are going to come together. And we can draw a line right where these two intersect and these intersect, and we'll be able to a little bit easier find and match the angles together from the leg to the top center section. Okay, so now you'll see that this matches this angle, and we're going to go ahead and line that up, and with the two lines coming out right here, we can just mark the corner of this, and on the other side mark the corner of the inside. We can transfer that across, and then we can just use our straight edge to connect those lines. And that's the easiest way I've found to get those fairly precision to kind of match those up. So now we've got our angle here and our opposite angle here. We're going to go ahead and cut this on the bandsaw and then sand that to length, and then you'll see that that matches this angle on this side and matches across there as well. Now that we've cut out this piece, you can even use this piece of paper as kind of a check after you're done, just to make sure that that's really going to line up. So you can just kind of line that up right there, put that to that line, and just make sure that that one is even with this line, and you'll know that your angles are going to match. So now the next step is to take the legs and just match those angles to the same right there, and those will meet up, and you'll have everything lined up properly. Now that we've got that piece, we're going to pull that away, and we're just going to take our leg and just kind of run it right along that line and do the same thing as we did on that top center piece. You can see the line is even the whole way down, so right at this mark, we're just going to make a mark here on the outside. And we're going to do the same thing right here on the inside. We'll flip this over, and we'll just transfer those lines onto the flat, connect those, and then make our cut. Okay, so I've cut this onto the first leg, and we're just going to go in here and line this up and just make sure that we're right. Getting this angle right is so important to a strong landing gear. So we're going to line this up once again. Line it up with the line, and you can see that the angle matches literally as perfect as you're going to get doing it by hand on a piece of paper and a belt sander. So now we'll take this one, and because we have to match this one over here, we're just going to take our other boom, lay this on top, and we can transfer that exact angle, and we'll know that will be pretty close. Transfer that line, make our cut, and then we'll be able to bolt all this together with our center section, drill our holes out, and bolt this this piece together. Alright, so we're going to transfer our holes onto this center section here so that we can bolt this together. So we're just going to lay this flat, and then we'll take this piece and we'll just put that there, and that's going to flush the top of this bracket with the top of the piece of wood. So then you'll notice under here that you're going to want to take the point of this and line it up with the point of that. So we'll just slide this bracket to where it lines up on each side, and you can see that the points are lined up accordingly. And if we squeeze that together, we can just transfer our holes with a pen or pencil right through here. Now I recommend drilling one of the holes and then putting a bolt through and actually drilling the other ones through to ensure that they're going to line up properly. Because if you try to do this by hand, especially with a hand drill, that drill bit's going to wander a little, and then you're going to end up having to run the drill back and ream that out anyhow. You'll also notice that the bracket holes are very, very tight for a bolt to go in, and that was done by design so that you can use the threads of this to actually tighten this together, and then the nut just holds it on for extra strength. Some parts of the build though, you might want to take a 3mm drill bit and ream out the holes, and that's your preference on how you want to work with that. So I have the bolts pushed through the center part here just temporarily, and I'm going to use this to line this up and transfer the holes over so we can drill the leg out to be bolted to the center landing gear section. When you transfer these holes, you're going to want to make sure that these angles are tight together here. The bottom side isn't as crucial, so if you have a gap, you want that on the bottom side, but just for aesthetics, you'll definitely want that to touch together on the top. So when you transfer these holes, make sure those are together nice and tight, and make sure this is flush down the sides. So we've marked our holes there, and we're going to go ahead and drill one of them. And you'll notice I'm using a block here, that way I'm not constantly drilling holes into my work surface. And again, that also stops from splintering out the bottom of the wood when the drill bit can pass through the piece and into the bottom piece of wood. Keeps from splintering that out. So we're going to line this up here. We'll drill out this piece here so that the bolt slides through easily. Now with that bolt in and this angle tight, we can go ahead and drill through our second one, and we'll know that that'll line up properly. Now that we've got that put together, you can see that our angle has closed up right there. We can bolt this all together by putting the back of the landing gear plate on as well. And then we're going to need to cut this to length. So before we bolt this all together, that's going to be the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and measure mine at 6 1/4 inches, which gives me just enough clearance for the DJI Zenmuse gimbal and a GoPro, which is what I fly on my copter. So we'll line up the point on the high side of the angle to 6 1/4. And go ahead and just make our scribe mark down here. We're going to make that cut, and then I can lay this one right on the other one and duplicate that for both pieces. Okay, so now that we have our two legs built, we have to make the feet for the bottom of them, and you're going to want to keep in mind when we drilled the boom arms for the motors and the plates, you'll remember that both the holes were on the same side. This is actually going to get flipped 90 degrees for the feet. So this obviously will bolt into here, and then the feet are going to run 90 degrees to that with these T-brackets on the bottom. So we're going to line those up and drill those and get ready to mount those onto the landing gear. So I measured the feet on my copter, and again, this is somewhat preference. I did mine 7 1/2, just kind of had a good look to it, and it stabilized the copter really well. So we'll flush our ruler at the end, mark 7 1/2, and then if you have a square, you can even use your square to transfer that line across. Another helpful thing then is to scribe your middle section so you know where to put the T-bracket so that it's lined up on the middle. Half of 7 1/2 is 3 3/4, so I'm going to go ahead and make that measurement now as well. So now we'll cut off this section with a bandsaw or a X-Acto razor saw, whatever you have to cut that off with, and then we have our center of our foot, and we'll proceed to put the T-bracket on. And you're going to want to do this twice, so make sure you repeat this section twice so that you build 2 feet. For one for each side of your landing gear. Okay, so now that we have our feet cut for the bottom, we're going to take this center line and we want to match this center up to this center so that your piece isn't offset at all. So you want to find the center of your bracket, which there's one of 2 ways to do that. You can either just use a piece of wood and just draw a center line down the middle and just line up on those 2 holes, or if you want to be really precise about it, this is actually 2 inches exactly. So you can use a set of calipers and go 1 inch and just scribe a line right there. And then you can line this up right on your scribe line to your foot. So then once again we can use our work surface to flush these and transfer the holes. So as I said earlier, and I've been doing throughout the build, I always drill one and then put a bolt through and drill the other one. That way I make sure that that lines up perfectly. So then we'll attach the other T-bracket onto the back, and then we'll be ready to put this onto the end of the landing gear and transfer those holes. Drill through each of those, bolt that down, and then repeat that process for the other side. Alright, so now we have our completed landing gear. We've got the center bracket bolted on, we've got our feet bolted on, everything looks to be nice and level. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is mount the rails to the top of the landing gear. We've got the landing gear all finished up, and we're going to take the rail system and we're going to use this smaller plate right here that comes with the kit in order to attach the rail system to the landing gear, and then ultimately that whole setup to the copter. So you're going to notice there's a different type of screw here that we're going to use to attach the rails to this plate and then through the holes that we'll drill for the landing gear. These are square top screws. They're faceted or beveled, I should say, on each side there. So I'm going to go ahead and put a round screw in here so you can see the difference, and you can see that round-headed screw versus the square one. So these are, anytime you're going to be putting something into the rail system, the square-headed screw is going to be used because it will go into the slot, and that's how it attaches whatever plate to the rail. So let's go ahead and line this up and drill the holes to mount this plate to the landing gear. To center this plate across the top of here, I found the easiest way is that because we have a center bolt, we can just use, we're going to use the middle set of holes, but we can use this front center hole to just kind of get a measurement for center. So we'll just line up this hole with the center bolt, kind of line that up. You'll see that you got equal distance on each side, and we can scribe a center line right there. So we've established center of our top landing gear section. And then the next thing that we're going to do is to drill the outer holes. So we can lay this over here. And we're not going to drill a middle hole down through here because these are only going to be going through up to the rails themselves. So you'll line up the scribe line and you'll be able to see that down through the center hole that we just made. And then we're just going to transfer a little mark through on this hole and that hole. Now I'm going to follow what I've been doing the whole time. I'm going to drill one hole, then I'll put the plate on and then line this back up and actually drill through here to make sure that that lines up perfectly. So let's go ahead and do that part now. So now we'll just use that as a guide. You can see that we still have our scribe line dead down the center of that hole, so we're still lined up properly. Center up the mark in this hole, and then we'll just squeeze that. And definitely be careful not to have a finger under here. You don't want to drill into your finger. Alright, so now we're ready to take this plate, and we're going to use 2 square top screws. We're just going to pop these right down through here. We're going to put the locking nuts on the bottom, but we're not going to tighten them all the way down yet. We're just going to put these on here. We're going to slide the rail system into the square holes, and then we can tighten it down with the nut driver. So we've got these pushed through the landing gear, and we just tighten our nuts on a little bit to get have some play here. And the reason for that is because there's a few other bolts that have to go down through here to help secure the rail system to this landing gear. So we're going to put 4 of the short square heads down through each of the corners on this landing gear plate. And now we can slide the rail through and we'll secure those with the nylon locking nuts on the bottom. So we'll do the main one first. And that'll keep these from falling out. Now we can put these other ones on here like this. Tighten those down and then adjust the rail after we get the camera plate and the battery plate put on. So we're not going to tighten this all the way down, just snug it up so that it doesn't fall back out. So this plate has the 2 bolts that hold through the landing gear, and then obviously the 2 on each side. So we got 2 through this one. So this side's complete. We got the main long bolt through the middle, and then the 2 short ones on the corners. So now we've got the main long bolt here. We're going to do the 2 short ones on the corners to repeat the process for the second rail. And we'll square up the whole system then once we attach the battery plate and the camera plate. All right, so in order to slide the battery tray on here, and that's going to really help to square up the whole rail system, we're going to take one of the short square head screws and we're just going to slide that right into the rail right here. And then we can take the battery tray, pop that on there, and we're just going to get a nut and just snug that down. It's not going to be totally tight yet. We're going to square everything up before we actually tighten it all down. But this will help to secure it. So we'll spin this on here. Now we're going to take another screw, go into that same side, and this one will go down here at this end. And because we didn't tighten this one, we can slide this to where that goes right through. Put another nylock nut on the back. Just as a starting point, I've just been flushing the end of the battery tray with the end of the rail system. So I'm going to snug this down. It's not going to be completely tight yet, but I'm going to snug it down to keep it to where the battery tray won't slide while we work on the other side. And we're going to take 2 more of those screws and do the same thing over here. And we'll go ahead and put it into there. And then I'm just going to hand tighten the nut on here. That way we can still pull that up enough to get the other screw down in. And this is the reason of having these kind of loose still, is I can slide this rail down here. We have room to put this square top screw in, and now we can slide this system back and we can just bend this just a little right here to give ourselves room to get that through. So now we'll take our last nylock nut, and then we're going to tighten these down. Now is the time where we can tighten these down pretty snug now, because that's going to stay flush with the rail for right now. You can move that battery later to adjust center of gravity, but for right now we're just going to go ahead and leave that right there. So we put the battery tray on with 1 bolt at a time. Now it's time to put the camera plate on, and we're going to do it just a little bit different way. We went ahead and loosened up the battery tray back here so that the camera rail can slide and be manipulated a little to put this in. But we put all the bolts and just finger tighten the lock nuts onto the camera plate, and then we're just going to go ahead and slide in the camera plate to the front of the rails. You can just slide on up and line up these 2 as well. So now we can just slide that rail on there like this. We can flush it with the front and then tighten the whole system down. So we've got all these bolts snugged up for the camera, for the battery tray. One last good turn here, make sure they're tight. And now we can decide how far forward or backward we want the entire rail system to sit. And that's going to be preference as well, depending on what size props you're running and where your arms are falling, whether you're using a gimbal or a static mount camera, or even maybe putting a Mobius in the top in between the rails. There's lots of different options. So you can slide this rail forward or backward. And then also it's going to affect the center of gravity of your copter. So there's a few things that you're going to want to look at, but we'll just tighten this down and get it in the ballpark in the center for now, and we can make those adjustments after we get this mounted to the copter. And now we can just lock this down to lock it in place. If you tighten these before, then this might need to be adjusted for the battery or the camera plate, and then you'd have to just untighten them again. So we just waited till the end to tighten up the whole bottom of the landing gear. We're going to attach the landing gear and the camera rail setup to the actual machine. So we take the 4 square head bolts and we just slide them all into here so that we can attach the ElectroHub on there accordingly. So we'll slide these in, and then the rubber grommets just kind of help to separate the rail system from the ElectroHub and kind of give it just a little degree of separation there for vibration. And the other nice thing is you can pick up on this and you can kind of turn those down a little bit, and that'll kind of hold that in place a little bit while you're mounting this to the copter. So we slide these 4 rubber grommets that are provided, And then these are actually knurled. These are the little finger twist nuts that go on the top to hold the camera rail to the copter, and these are knurled so you can actually just turn these with your finger. So first let's go ahead and mount this to the copter. And you're going to use the 4 holes that are off the center point in the front. You'll go to this side one and that side one, and the same thing in the back where the tail boom is. You're going to go to the holes just to the sides of that to do your mounting. So we'll show that, go right in here. We'll pop those front 2 in, and then we'll just slide the bolts towards the back. All right, so once you get through the bottom plate, sometimes it's a little tricky to get the holes to line up in the top, so you can just use a pair of needle nose pliers like this and line up. And then once you get those front 2 lined up, sometimes the back ones will just line up automatically, but if they don't, it's a good idea to just kind of finger tighten this on just enough to hold that from popping back through while you get the back ones on. But this lined up really well, and so we have the 4 through there, so we'll go ahead and put these finger tighten knurl nuts on here. Okay, so now that we have these through here, and I haven't tightened them down all the way yet, we're going to look at these holes, which would be the outrigger booms if you were building a Dragonfly or a Hexa, but they're the ones that just go straight out from center at, like, let's say 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and we're going to put those dead center over the rails. So I'm going to slide the copter until those are nice and centered right over the actual legs. The next holes, you know, obviously you want to make sure is just if you have a center line drawn from 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock where the tail boom is mounted, that you're just to the next set of holes to the outside of each of those for the camera rail. It really won't line up if you try to do it any other way, so that's just a way that you can check that. So we're going to tighten those up pretty good so that holds the rail system in place. Now, if you have a gimbal or a hard-mounted GoPro or a Mobius camera, you can attach that accordingly and then slide this to make sure that you have center of gravity adjusted properly. And so now we're ready to put on a board mount and get the NACE 32 board that I'm going to use for this particular build on there and programmed. And then we'll check our motor direction, put some props on, and go out and give it a test flight. Now I'm going to mount the NACE 32 board to the copter, and I designed this little mount to make mounting the NACE and other boards a little bit easier. So you're going to take the laser cut piece, you're going to cut out each of these little, punch out each of these little blocks, which are then going to be built up. So there's 1, 2 on each side that just kind of lifts this up off of the surface of the ElectroHub and allows wiring to come out of the front or the back. So then you put a little bit of double-sided sticky tape on there after you've built those up and CA'd them together. And I usually always run a bolt or a screw down through here like this in order to line those up while I'm gluing them. And then we're going to put the double-sided sticky tape onto there to adhere it to the ElectroHub. So we'll peel that off, and then I will put the 3mm bolts down through there just as a guide to line it up. You can bolt it to the copter if you want to, but I've never done it that way. It's designed to do that if you want to. So we'll put these bolts down through here and just use them as guides, and you're going to want to go the same horizontal. So basically if this is 12 o'clock, you're going to do 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And we're just going to put these right in those holes, make sure our wires are clear, and then we're just going to sit this down and press it to the ElectroHub. Now, the laser cut scribe lines will show that your NACE, I'm going to use the NACE board on this build, so it'll be perfectly square, perfectly over center of gravity to the copter. And then you can either leave those in, or if you want for weight, you can just pull those back out now that we've got it taped on. You can see that, I mean, you can lift the whole copter up by that, and it's not going anywhere. That double-sided tape is really strong, so that'll hold that in place. But keep in mind also, this is an elements part that's not included with the package as a whole. So if you want this board mount, this is a separate piece that you'll have to click on in the store to order. So it does make life a lot easier, so definitely grab one of those to help with your build. So I got my NACE 32 board flashed, and if you do choose to use the NACE 32 board, feel free to go to the NACE 32 setup video that we have on the Flite Test page. You can check that out about how to do actually the flashing and the firmware upgrade and all that stuff for this particular board. And I'm pretty sure we have some for the other boards like the Vector and so on. So you can use any flight controller that you choose. You'll want to pay attention if you are using, most flight controls are marked. I know the Naze 32 has this little gold arrow right there showing where forward is. So you're going to want to make sure to put the board on properly. So we'll stick that right over that little mount. It'll be nice and centered. We'll just press it down real good. Okay, so we've got the Naze 32 board put on to the copter. It's all hooked up. We've bound our Graupner receiver to it and everything is set up. We checked the direction of the motors according to the Naze configuration, so we're all set. The only thing we have to do now is just tighten these wires on so that they're not going to get caught in the props, and then put our propellers on and go out for a test flight. Okay, so we got props on the copter, and one thing you're going to want to keep in mind on any coaxial copter like a Y6 copter or a Quad X8 copter is that one motor on the top is always going to spin a different way than the motor on the bottom. So for instance, this one on the top is spinning counterclockwise, this one is spinning clockwise. You're never going to have them spinning the same direction because you need the torque going opposite ways to keep it centered and straight. So even though this motor's upside down, you're going to want to make sure the prop is still correct side up with the numbers right there. So we'll pop this guy on here. And then you're going to want to get a wrench and tighten those down, and then we're ready to put a battery on this and go out for a test flight. So we're gonna give this thing a test flight here. This is just default settings, so I'm sure I'm gonna have some gains to adjust a little bit initially, and it's pretty windy out here today, but I'm gonna go ahead and fly the straight armed version that we built in the build video here, and Peter's actually got the angled arm version.
Yeah, I got the angled Y6.
So he's gonna fly that, and I'm gonna fly this, and we'll see what happens. Was pretty fun.
Yeah,
the gains were a little high on this one, so I got some adjustment to do. But so you have the vector on that. How'd that work for you?
This thing's actually really stable. Right now, it's just got the vector and the angled arms, and there's no GPS or anything, and it's actually really locked in.
Just sits there, yeah. Well, we hope you guys enjoy building the Y6 AP. I'm looking forward to getting a gimbal on this thing and doing some more work with it. We'll see you guys later.